Hey guys, this is Redrame here. For some of you, this might actually be your first time seeing me in person, since I'm normally just kind of on the back end, playing the game, having fun. I do well every once in a while, build some decks, publish some decks in case people are curious, just because I like sharing them. But I don't really consider myself to be much of a community man. I barely ever check the Reddit, barely ever check anything for that matter. I stream every once in a while, but I more or less kind of keep that quiet. But, when there is a reason to be called to arms, I'm definitely willing to give feedback. And this last patch definitely feels like a viable reason for that. So, with my credentials, obviously I'm not really a video guy. I'm planning to just do all of this in one long take. There's not really going to be any editing going on. So if you want something that's clean, polished, short, go look somewhere else. There are plenty of people that actually make money for doing that. But I'm not one of them. So I'm mostly doing this for myself because, for one, I want to get my opinions off of my chest so that I don't have to feel like I'm holding in, certain viewpoints and kind of just dodging the problem. But also because some people who are, relatively close to me have asked me a lot of questions about this stuff. And it would be really nice to have somewhere to point them to instead of actually just, answering each time. Whenever I get put on the spot, a lot of times it's a little bit difficult. So figured I would make this. And, maybe people are curious. So if you want to know what I think, now you can. I originally was not going to make this video because, yes, the patch was really shitty for a lot of different reasons. But for quite a while, I was still able to enjoy the game really well. And just the fact that there was a patch, even though the patch had an enormous number of bugs, and also poor card changing decisions. Despite all that, I'm not going to sugarcoat that. That's a really bad decision, and I'm going to spend the majority of the video talking about those and some other issues. Despite all that, just the fact that we got a patch, we got a UI improvement, that was enough to keep me happy for a really long time because the game felt extremely stale. There were some frustrating things in the game, from the patch before. Like Necker Warrior Consume, for example, basically at that time, it felt like there was no counterplay to it other than how many mushroom type effects are in your deck to banish the Neckers, or, you can run locks, things like that. But it mostly felt like that deck was blatantly the highest power deck, and all that was really keeping it down was the fact that Emir, which was, the best deck in the format at the time, could just run Peter and bounce it over and over again. And it feels like cards like that shouldn't exist in the game, just because those types of designs are ticking time bombs. The moment that the meta shifts away from cards that directly counter them, the raw value is just going to ruin the meta and especially ruin creative deck building for people that don't want to play meta decks, because instead of thinking about, what is your deck? What do you want your deck to do? You're going to have to think about what is your deck and how does it counter, Neckers, or how does it counter spies, or how does it counter, something that you very blatantly have to interact with in order to not lose the game. And, those types of metas are not very healthy generally. So because of things like that, I was kept pretty happy by the patch for a while. And then Scoia'tael happened, and that was kind of the final straw. There were a few other things that really pushed me to make this video. People defending Siri Nova, for example, I think is an absolutely... I think that's miserable. I don't know why people are defending that card. It's not blatantly overpowered or anything like that. There are ways to beat the card. It's not like it's going to win every game. But what it does do is exactly what I mentioned cards like Necker are capable of doing, which is force people to run certain cards in their deck, like Igni, or Scorch, or Bork. Not so much Bork anymore, because Scoia'tael can just murder Bork, but you get my point. And also because it's a neutral card that has an extremely high inclusion rate, and it's not even an interesting neutral card. Like, even Muzzle, which was... Okay, to be fair, Muzzle was probably more problematic than Cyrenova, because it sort of just ruined any sort of engine, ruined your ability to do anything interesting in the game. But, you know, Cyrenova's just a vanilla, and there's really nothing cool about, hey, look, in any of the 5 deck factions, I can, instead of playing some sort of tribal synergy, try and get, like, as much value out of my bronzes as possible. I can instead pick 2 of each bronzes that make decent vanillas, so that, since I'm not relying on them, and then slam them in a deck with some good silvers and golds, and I just get a 25 for free. Like, I don't see why that's interesting to people. People act like that's good for creative deck building, but it's really not. And perhaps the even more frustrating part about that is that they released Shoop in the same patch, and Shoop is a really awesome card. Like, with Highlander, sure, you run into some of the same problems, but unlike with Cyrenova, by the time you're running Shoop, you actually have to include some pretty suboptimal cards in your deck. And it's an interesting challenge to try and make them work. And the card that you're building your deck around has 15 different options and a lot of cool utility. And I think that leads to some pretty interesting gameplay. So I think just that contrast there should make it obvious to people why Cyrenova really shouldn't be in the game in its current state. But again, I'm getting off topic here. A couple other things I wanted to bring up. I'm going to be looking at a few things in this video that are visual. One of them is on the screen right now. It is the most recent Gwen-Up report. You can probably guess why that might be on the screen. Has something to do with this guy here. But I have a couple of other things, including some a quick survey that I did with myself on just current cards in the game that isn't really too relevant to this video, but I thought some people might find it interesting. But yeah, I think that is basically everything I wanted to get off my chest before really digging in. I basically already gave my opinion about quite a few issues in this patch, but I guess I will start over and basically just make it all concrete. So, few good things that came out of this patch, just to say that I gave a full review. I mentioned the UI improvement, but also the new cards, I think, for how many weird design changes they made to the old cards, a lot of the new cards that don't utilize the create mechanic are actually pretty cool, which is kind of odd to me, because it makes me think that if they have... I assumed that the reason that CDPR was resorting to create mechanic designs was because they're super easy to put out, they can be super lazy with them, and they're kind of just an easy way to diversify gameplay, which, for one, I don't think is what Gwent should be about. I think Gwent is a game that attracts an audience that is looking for something that is a little bit more consistent than Hearthstone. I'm not going to try to compare Gwent to Hearthstone too much, but I can say that personally, having played Hearthstone in the past, this game feels a lot more like Hearthstone, and I'm not going to call that a bad thing. I'm not one of those people who just got up, saw Gwent, left Hearthstone, you know, now complains about Hearthstone nonstop. I still play Hearthstone every once in a while. I think the game is fine. It appeals to a different audience. That's okay. You know, not everyone has to like the same thing. I'll just leave it at that. But, you know, I think that when people play Gwent, they're not looking to play Hearthstone, they're looking to play Gwent. And the create mechanic is really kind of... I don't even know what to say about this one. Stupid. I guess that's kind of the nicest way I can put it. There are a couple of problems there, though, because I don't want to blatantly just hate on the create card because it's like, or the create mechanic because, oh, it's RNG. RNG is bad. Okay? I'm not one of those guys. And it's very easy to get lost within the depths of, you know, people on Reddit who are making those types of complaints. I'm going to try to keep it constructive here, as annoyed as I am with some of the things that happened this patch. But one issue that I have with Create is that, for one, the designers seem to have no clue what Create's purpose in the game is, because there was a public statement about Create that said that none of the Create cards will be viable in competitive play. I am not even okay, that might be going a bit too far. I am against Create cards seeing any use in competitive play. I want that statement to hold. But even if it didn't hold, I could live with it as long as it actually seemed like they were supposed to be seeing competitive play and not supposed to be supporting, like, a game mode that doesn't even fucking exist for some unknown... Well, obviously it's in development. I'm not going to say it's an unknown reason, but printing cards for a new game mode that is not coming out when those cards are coming out, that are instead ruining the current game state, when they are not intended to ruin the game state. If that is what's going on here, that's absolutely ridiculous. And the evidence seems to point to that being what's going on here, because the other options are that the balancers have absolutely no clue. Actually, no, now that I say that, maybe it is just that the balancers have no clue what they're doing with these cards. That, I think in some cases that is very possible as well, but you have either one of two scenarios here, and that is either that the people in charge of balancing the cards to be, you know, just create cards that, you know, can be interesting, can be used in fun decks, but are not highly competitive. Either the balancing for those cards is completely off, or the statement that create cards are not intended to be competitive is a lie. And I think no matter which one of those cases is true, it's very easy to say that CDPR royally fucked up. Because telling people that cards are not going to be viable and that they're just in the game for a specific purpose, and then that being completely wrong, is not going to make people happy. And I would prefer that it was an accident. I would prefer that we're not being manipulated by the PR team. I don't think we are. I mostly trust CDPR as a company. They have a lot of really cool people. I don't obviously have connections with them because I'm not much of a big shot, but you know, from what I can tell, they seem really nice. So I don't want to make this a video bashing CDPR, but at the end of the day, they fucked up and they deserve to be bashed for that. And I don't know, I'm not inside, so I don't know which one of those it is, but that's something that needs to be said. And I do feel like, you know, I don't want to make the Petrify... I'm not going to call it the Petrify mistake, because Petrify I don't even think was pointing at any fingers at people in his video. But I don't want to point fingers at people saying that they are dishonest, because, you know, I'm friends with quite a few of the YouTube personalities, and I can tell that they're, you know, genuinely giving their opinions, and that, you know, at the beginning of the patch, when most people put out their videos discussing the patch, it really did feel like more of a balance of pros and cons. And it was important to recognize that even though CDPR really fucked up, they did try to improve the game, and, you know, they were successful in quite a few ways. So I don't think that people are being dishonest, but I do think that the finger needs to be pointed. So I am going to point the finger, since no one else will. I mean, that's obviously being melodramatic. It's not that no one else will. A lot of people are pointing the finger right now, but, you know, I feel like the finger needs to be pointed more publicly. Instead, right now you kind of just have a mosh pit of people, you know, knocking on CDPR for different things. It feels like there needs to be more of a voice. So if I can be that, then great. If I'm just getting in the way, then, man, I don't really care. What else did I want to say? Oh, the bugs. The bugs are fun. The bugs are really fun. That being said, I don't think there's really much you can do about the bugs other than fix them. The fact that the bugs have not been fixed after 2+ weeks, okay, so I should probably give the narrative here, even though people are obviously familiar with this. There was a 24-hour PTR that was public, and I have no clue why, and nobody has any clue why. And it was just an extremely dumb decision on CDPR's end that honestly brought them a lot more. I think that CDPR sort of brought a lot of the negativity that's coming from this patch on themselves by making a public testing realm that then only lasted for 24 hours, ended with the game immediately releasing, and had absolutely no changes. So the real question is, why did the PTR exist? And the feeling that I get from it, maybe other people are getting different feelings, but the feeling that I get from it is that the PTR existed for show, for people to be like, ooh, look at the new cards. And it totally backfired, because it was, oh, look at the new cards. This game is going to be totally broken. I really hope they fix this. And then they didn't fix it. And in fact, it almost felt like they made it even worse, because the more you got to play with the patch, even though they obviously didn't make it even worse, you got to experience the bugs in addition to the obviously changed cards. So the PTR, in my opinion, if you're going to make a public, like, if you're going to keep that stuff open instead of just testing it with a few specific people, it should be for a reason. If you want to get people hyped about the new cards, what you do is you release the new cards. That's pretty straightforward. Most people were pretty hyped when the patch actually came out. If anything, they were less hyped because that PTR existed. And so, because of that, I'm very confused about that decision, but there's not really much more to say there. Check my outline, see what else I didn't mention. There's Scoia'tael. I'm amazed I haven't even gotten to Scoia'tael yet. Obviously, there's going to be a faction on top at any given point in the meta. Ideally, you have it a very close contest, but, you know, just the theory behind it, you're never going to hit a complete equilibrium where every single leader has a 50% win rate in every single matchup. That's just not going to happen. So it is not the fact that Brewer's on top that's concerning to me, but the reason why Brewer is on top. The reason why this deck is extremely unhealthy to have on top, and especially on top in, like, this massive of a displacement here. Like, you've got the next most popular leader is Bran. Brewer is almost 3 times as popular as the next most popular leader. Has the highest win rate, and has more play by himself than any of the other factions, adding all of their leaders together. Brewer has more than 3 times as much play as all 4 NR leaders combined. To be fair, NR is mostly Hensel right now, so you could say he's got more than 3 times as many plays as Hensel, and that would mean mostly the same thing, but that is still ridiculous. So, for one, there should never be anything like that. You should make the gap closer. Having only one deck in the meta is bad for a number of reasons. It suggests that the deck can't really be countered even if you try to counter it, which is not quite the truth here. You see some Emirs rising up to try and mill Brewer. It usually works, but a lot of times Brewer can sneak in wins there. So even explicitly trying to counter Brewer is a bit of a pain right now. But also, the deck is strong in an extremely straightforward way, and not really a way that you can easily counter. It's not a synergy-dependent deck like last patch's Spies were. It just plays really good vanillas. And it in long rounds, it plays a Ithilien, which is a vanilla that goes and wipes your opponent's board for 2 damage and makes 6-point cards. So it has all the bases covered for short, medium, and long rounds. It's not really clear what type of round you're supposed to try and aim for against Brewer. For example, using Emir Spies as the template here, since that was the premier deck last meta. Against Emir, obviously an extremely powerful deck. People were complaining it was overpowered. It was probably slightly overtuned, but I didn't think it was anywhere nearly as grossly strong as Brewer. And I think most people will agree with that. But against Emir, you could really identify their tools. They had the 6 key bronze cards, Imperial Brigade and Imperial Enforcers, that gave every single spy that Emir played value. Without those cards, the deck is pretty pointless. It just plays negative 2-point emissaries and doesn't really do much. And then you had Joachim, which was your big finisher that could win you a really short round if you made like a 1 to 2 to maybe 3 card round. You could just play a really big card and win. But if you split the difference there and played kind of a medium length round, this deck was actually fairly weak because it took a while to get going and it didn't have that many tools for just playing strong vanillas. The best vanilla this deck had was an Infiltrator, which was a 9 at the time. That's a pretty shitty vanilla. Some of them ran Vilgefort, so you could get a little bit more medium round power with a card like that. But a lot of the plays were really telegraphed, and if you had a way to grab round control from this deck, or kill Imperial Enforcers to deny their round 1, then you could very easily abuse that and play the round so that you could beat this deck. But with Brewer, what you can do is, most of the time you don't even win round 1 because the deck has so much tempo. But even when you do win round 1, you don't really know what to do against this deck because it has long round power with Ithilien, multiple strong plays that can win either a short round or a medium round. Like, you notably have, like, as far as 1-card finishers go, they have Polly, which is an easy 20 points and sometimes 23, occasionally even 26. They have a Tori, which pulls Barclay and makes a whole bunch of points. Doing the quick arithmetic in my head, that's 22. And that's even if you miss the Agitator. If you hit the Agitator, it can be even more than that. And so those are like Nova level finishers. There's more than one of them. So if you play, a really short round, you better have Siri Nova. Like if you play a 1-card round. But if you don't play a 1-card round, you can get even more screwed because they have multiple different options for finishers. They have really high value golds that can keep up with a sort of medium length round. It's not like they're just relying on one play. And then they have the whole Ithilien deal, and they can line up a really good Yorvith Meditation if you choose to play a longer round. So there's really no good winning against this deck unless you have a very specific plan like X-Men and an extremely long round and a ton of weather and crap like that. This deck becomes very hard to beat, especially if you don't win the coin flip. If you lose the coin flip against this deck and you're not also playing this deck, you can pretty much kiss that game goodbye. Like, it is extremely rare to win those games. Like, the War Dancer can even abuse you. Winning against this deck is sometimes a negative, and that's something that I really hate in Gwent. That's what a lot of people disliked about Carryover. But the fact that you can win a round against Brewer and that it's painful enough to do, and they're always going to slam Dennis round 1 and play a bunch of dwarves, and then just War Dancer you after you've burned all your resources, is pretty ridiculous. And, of course, it's complemented by the spy problem, because how do you deal with War Dancer spies? And, eventually Brewers got tired of that, so they just started running their own spy package. And now every single game, even against Brewer, which is supposed to be a proactive deck that doesn't really rely on round control as much, even with that type of deck, you now see spies everywhere. And spice everywhere is obviously another really big problem, especially because spies are now all the same strength. Because why? I really don't get it. It's honestly kind of a good joke, aside from the fact that I'm stuck in the joke and I kind of really hate my life because of that. But, you know, I'll still take it as a joke, I guess. Wah. I don't even know what to say. So, basically, this deck can do everything. It punishes you for playing Swarm. Swarm practically doesn't exist because Stammelford's Tremors is in the game, and Iflane is in the game. And neither of those cards should be in the game in their current state, particularly Iflane. Iflane is the offender here because Iflane, none of the other like spell or items, you know, tag organic, you know, whatever tag you use, Iflane is far stronger than any of the other cards in the game that rely on tags. So any other card that shares an appreciation for the spell tag gets completely dicked on by Iflane. Because Iflane is a 2-point gold card that can cast 2 bronze cards. If you do the math on that, a typical bronze this patch is supposed to be worth like 13. And a typical, you know, gold this patch is maybe supposed to be around like 18 to 20. Obviously, those numbers, you can debate them, but no matter where you set those numbers, Iflane is ridiculous. Because Iflane, you get 2 points plus 2 times a bronze card, which, with my numbers, would be 26. And that's a 28-point gold, which is 8 points higher than 20. So, because of that, you know, Iflane's obviously been in the game for a while. You might be asking, why wasn't Iflane oppressive last meta when it was exactly the same card? And it was because CDPR's balance decisions was, hey, look, this card is in the game. If we adjust the math so that we have the best spell be Alzur's Thunder or some shit like that, and we make it, you know, a 7-point bronze, suddenly Iflane's math is not too terrible. Alzur's Thunder is worth more than 7 points because it's also removal, so there's that as well, but, you know, that's how they balance the math to bring Iflane's power level, which is theoretically way above any other gold in the game. That's how they bring it down to the level of golds in the game. But the moment you slip up or want to print like any spell that's actually viable on its own or viable with the other cards that synergize with spells, I can't even really think of any other cards that synergize with spells because Iflane puts them down so hard. There might not even be any. But if you want to print a card like that, then Iflane immediately becomes busted. And that's just a huge constraint on design space that shouldn't exist. So I am mostly fine with Tremors because if you try to run Tremors in pretty much any deck that doesn't play Iflane, like I've been experimenting with Kirstenar that runs a full test recently. If you try putting Tremors in that deck, it's actually surprisingly underwhelming. And it doesn't really feel like it's a broken card or anything like that. It's just this combo, and it's just an overstated gold that causes other cards to be understated that's ruining the fun for all the bronze cards. So I would really like to see Iflane tuned down, likely to her pre-buffed, like her pre-changed form a while ago, back when the Iflane Dwarf deck was a thing, where she was like heavily disloyal. Or honestly, even removed from the game would be fine with me, but I've learned to not expect things like that from CDPR. Most of the time, those cards are there to stay. So you have that. Iflane is not fun. What else do you have? You have a Glace. A Glace was a ticking time bomb, much like, I forget what other card I said was, Necker. Which, you know, sat in the game for a little while and was kind of getting countered and kind of didn't have enough support. And then eventually the value was just there because Blizzard got outed, and you could reliably do all the crazy Necker shenanigans. But another card that I think fits the bill there is a Glace. I have been complaining about this card for a really long time. not too vocally, but, you know, to people that I know, I've been saying, why is this card even in the game? It shouldn't be. And a lot of people kind of gave me funny looks for that. But it was a Nilfgaard meta at the time. And a Glace, again, numerically, there are two problems with the Glace. One, she's numerically insane, just like Ithilien is. If you compare a Glace to a very similar golden Caretaker for monsters, a Glace's body is 5 points larger than Caretaker's body. So if you pull the same strength target, which, assuming there is a target, very often it's a similar strength to the one you would get from Caretaker, you're just getting 5 free points on a gold that sees competitive play. Caretaker's definitely a usable gold. It's not like I'm comparing a Glace to Geralt or anything and claiming that a Glace is OP. So that's pretty disgusting. The other problem with the Glace is that in a meta where she's used, like this one, she actively disincentivizes you from putting spells in your deck. Particularly in this faction, where there aren't any spells that are so core to your deck that you just say fuck it and run all the spells that you want to run in your deck. In this deck, there are 1 to 2 spells that this deck would probably use if a Glace was not a card, but are automatically not viable because a Glace is a card. Pretty much the only spell that's safe from a Glace is Scorch in a Scorch deck, because a Glace's body is so ridiculously large for that effect that she'll actually usually Scorch herself. But other than Scorch, there's pretty much no spell that you want to run in these types of decks. Scorch and Summoning Circle, because Summoning Circle is doomed. You'll note that in the popular reveal list for Morvran, that takes advantage of Enchantress, that deck usually runs Scorch, Summoning Circle, Enchantress for Scorch or Summoning Circle, and absolutely no other spells. And now you have your reason for it. And that to me is absolutely disgusting, because I think that kills deck. That kills not only like card design, but also deck building. Ithilien at least doesn't kill deck building, because you're going to run the same cards in your deck regardless of the fact that Ithilien exists and is going to dick on you every game. But a Glace, the fact that it punishes you for running cards is not cool at all. And then you have the new gold card, Yorvith Meditation. That's another card that punishes you for running big cards. The fact that you can get punished for running 2 big cards. Like, you play a 13. If you play a 21 on the board after that, then the 21 is actually negative points for you, because, you know, you're going to ram the 13 into the 21 and they're both going to die. Whereas otherwise, Yorvith Meditation couldn't target anything, because it's just the 13 sitting there. That to me is pretty ridiculous. That type of card effect should not exist in the game. A Glace and Yorvith Meditation. Ithilien, I would like to see nerfed. A Glace and Yorvith Meditation, and probably even Isengrim Outlaw, I would like to see flat out removed from the game. I'm just going to be honest there. I don't think those card designs are fun. Yorvith Meditation's a little better because it's spawned a few Fibonacci memes. I can get behind that a little bit, but it's still not fun at all to play against. I don't really know to put that less bluntly. And then you have Isengrim Outlaw, my most hated card in this entire set. All of the RNG cards. I don't want to make a blanket statement here saying all the RNG cards are dumb, because people at this point have probably heard that one 1,000 times. You know, I play this faction here. This faction takes advantage of Dijkstra a lot. I can get behind Dijkstra as a card. That's always kind of my... I don't want Dijkstra to become a token here, being like, hey, this is the one RNG card in the entire game that I like being in the game, so now I don't automatically hate all the RNG cards. I don't want it to be like that. There are other cool cards in the game that take advantage of RNG mechanics, where they're either low impact or where they're where they can be somewhat controlled. Like with Dijkstra, for example, going back to Dijkstra, of course. Yeah, just anyways. Okay, that's funny to me, but still going off of that example because it's the one I thought of. The ideal time to play Dijkstra is when you have 2 cards in your deck and you know exactly what you're getting. That to me is really cool. Obviously, you're not always going to play Dijkstra when there are only 2 cards left in your deck, but it gives you something to strive for when you're building a deck around that card. And I think that's really powerful. But when you play something like a Runestone in your deck, you might look for item synergy because it's an item. But other than that, you might look for alchemy synergy because it's an alchemy card. But other than that, there's nothing you're going to do to build your deck around Runestone. Absolutely nothing. And with, Isengrim Outlaw, what are you going to do to build around? Okay, so for the one ability is fine to play a spell. You can play Decoy. You can play Commander's Horn if you run it. You can play a few cute things. But in reality, that card mostly, either through drawing all of the spells in the deck, because that deck has so many auto-include cards that you can't afford to run very many spells, or by just choosing to run other silvers instead, that are, units that are also viable in that deck, like Ida or Pavko. Cards like those can be pretty strong in Brewer. You will see people most of the time pick the Create an Elf. And that pool is particularly frustrating. And anyone who's played the game will know why. Because with all the other pools, every once in a while, out of all the cards in the game, your opponent will magically get the one you want, and you'll feel kind of cheated. But you can still sort of get a laugh out of that, because it happens fairly rarely with cards like Runestone. But with Isengrim Outlaw, there are infamously 8 cards in the pool, and it shows you 3 of them. And that is almost a coin flip to get what you want. So your matchup against Axeman is a coin flip based on whether or not you get Ida. Your matchup against Consume is a coin flip based on whether or not you get Kiaran. Your matchup against, generic deck that doesn't have a utility target becomes a coin flip based on whether or not you get Hattori. It's absolutely ridiculous. And if you whiff the card that you want, this gold is just playing this gold to spawn an elf is just strictly worse than playing some of the other golds that the faction has access to. Like, for example, if you pull an ambush card with Isengrim Outlaw, which is a fairly common result, you see Morin, Teruvial, and Molina off of that card. If you do that, Isengrim Outlaw is 5 points less than vanilla Isengrim. Sure, you have to put the ambush card in your deck. That's a disadvantage to Isengrim, obviously, but that is still absolutely ridiculous. Compared to when you just win out from that card and win the game because of it. And it's especially frustrating, the one that I saved for last is in the situation where you're playing round 2 and getting spied, and you roll Isengrim Outlaw to try and pull a Yavin, because there's absolutely no fun result from that. You either whiff the Yavin and played a gold card while you're massively ahead on points instead of just playing some shitty bronze that you don't want in your hand. Or you get a Yavin and you just get a free card. Like, meh? That's in the game for some reason. So, that's cool. So, obviously, from the fact that I didn't even give an outline about what I hated about Scoia'tael, the golds are the biggest offenders, by far. Those golds are extremely strong and extremely punishing for opponents doing things that they should be doing when they're building decks or when they're playing the game, such as playing a spell, playing units that contain points, and playing 1 or 2 strength units. Like, those are not things that you should have to actively avoid in a game. And, these cards are so ridiculously punishing that they just sculpt the meta like nothing else I've seen in this game. So I'll take a breather from Scoia'tael because I've probably beaten the horse to death. What else did I want to mention? Cards being changed to vanillas instead of just new vanillas being added to the game. This is obviously more of a nitpicky discussion, but I do think it's one that should be had because some people are sort of just being like, what's the big deal? They're dead cards. First of all, a lot of people, when saying that all the cards that they changed were dead, are stretching that argument. For example, Clandrummond's Shield Maiden is a card that was not like tier 1 level competitive, but it was a card that you could reasonably run. You wouldn't lose the game from running 3 Clandrummond's Shield Maidens in your deck before this patch. Now you definitely would because the card is absolute dog shit. So thanks for that one, CDPR. Obviously that's only one example, but what about like Clan Brockvar Hunter? Clan Brockvar Hunter saw real play. That one even could have been argued to be tier 1 level competitive if you thought Great Swords were particularly good. But at the very least, it was a Skellige card. Now it's a 6 steel 5. It's very easy to add 6 steel 5s to the game. Like they added the Aedirnian Mauler dude for Northern Realms. That card is actually seeing a little bit of play, which is kind of funny to me. I haven't tried the card myself, but, cool. Like, new card sees a little bit of play, awesome. But, like, overriding cards that already exist when the CDPR has clearly proven that they're very willing to just tweak numbers willy-nilly on the cards, I think is kind of dumb to me. Speaking of the tweaking numbers willy-nilly on the cards, I won't call a lot of the patch changes that they made to existing cards bad, but I will call them lazy, because it feels like what they did was they just looked at usage statistics and said, hey, here's a card that doesn't see much play. Let's see what happens if we give 1 point to it. Hey, here's a card that sees absolutely no play at all. Let's add 2 points to it. Hey, here's a card that's actively considered like a turbo meme or a card that's just been blatantly power creeped and really looks like it shouldn't even be in the game. Let's give it a 3-point buff. Like, if you go down the patch changes, that's pretty consistent with what they did. For example, Mangonel got a 2-point buff by dealing 2 damage to a random enemy when it enters the board, whereas Ermion, which was even more useless than Mangonel, got a 3-point buff. Sarthissius as well, cards like that. And for the most part, it really didn't feel like they considered the context of the card, why the cards were failing, or potential ways that they could change the text instead of the actual numbers to make those cards interesting. So I don't want to emphasize that too much because I know CDPR's got a lot on their hands right now, and if I acted like this was priority number 1, I would be a fool because there's a lot of cleanup to do from this last patch. Yeah, I won't say much else there. But I do think that type of design should probably be a little bit more intended and not just like, hey, let's see what happens. There are a couple of other more specific balance changes that seem like, hey, let's see what happens. One that's infamously been pointed out is Foglet from Dagon being nerfed because Foglet had a 100% inclusion rate in Fog decks. Despite there being no other Fog synergy cards besides Ancient Foglet, which sucked. So, the card at least doesn't suck now. The buff to Ancient Foglet, I think, was pretty reasonable. Like, it was meant to be a vanilla card that's synergized with Fog. Like, that one I'm okay with getting a 2-point buff. But the Foglet nerf was extremely weird to me. It worked out for the better, funnily enough, for some Siri Nova decks that wanted to just play Dagon and Woodland Spirit, which would then run 2 Foglets. With the old Foglet, you would be most likely reusing 1 Foglet, and then Siri Nova wouldn't happen. Or you would have to run a dead Foglet in your deck that you could only get out if you played 2 Fogs in 1 round. So it's kind of funny that what was intended as a nerf actually sort of became a feature for some of those decks. Which, again, makes me think that CDPR should be a little bit more careful with how they balance. But the real point here is that what people are... This is one where I really agree with the rest of the community. You know, I have some dissenting opinions here, but there really should be more of like... Man, I hate saying do what Hearthstone does, just like Merchant said that he hated doing what Hearthstone does, but do what Hearthstone does here. Give us something to point at to say, hey, that's kind of a bullshit reason for changing this card. Like, I'm glad that they at least said, we nerfed this card because it has a 100% inclusion rate in fog decks. Like, that's actually the most ridiculous reason I've ever heard, but at least it's something to point at. Whereas a lot of the other cards were just changed, no comment. And I find that a little bit more frustrating for changes that didn't make sense. For the ones where there were just value tweaks on cards that were obviously dead, I can live with those, but, you know. I don't want to beat that horse anymore. What else is there? Oh, this one, though. This one, on the other hand. So there are sort of 2 issues here. One is that they're trying to simplify wording. So some cards got wording cut from them on effects that stayed the same. And people thought that they changed because the wording was cut and it did not include certain aspects of the card that were already a part of the card. What's a good example here? I haven't played much Calvite, so it's possible that I'm actually wrong on this, but I believe Calvite still shows you the top 3 cards from your deck. Man, I'm gonna really eat my words if I'm wrong on that. But it just says, look at 3 cards. And that's kind of funny to me. I know there are some more concrete examples of this that I'm not thinking of. Damn it, what is it? I'll just leave that one be. But there are definitely cards like that, but I think the bigger issue is cards that either did not change wording at all, but did change effect, and you didn't really have anywhere that you could read that they changed effect. There wasn't like a giant monolith of patch notes anywhere that I could find. And if I couldn't find it, chances are other people couldn't find it, since I've played quite a bit more Gwent than some other people. So there's that. And then there are also cards that did change, but the wording was extremely difficult to find the changing on. Not necessarily that the word didn't change, but... Not that the wording didn't change, but that it was very unclear when you were skimming over the cards that the card had changed. By far the best example of this is Tremors. You know, early on in the patch, I was like, hey, look, cool, Scoia'tael actually got some pretty good tools that I bet will make them a little bit more viable. And, you know, early on, everyone was complaining, not that Scoia'tael was too strong, but that Scoia'tael, which was the 5th faction last season, just got even worse. And that CDPR obviously doesn't care about their faction balance and yada yada yada. And I knew that the people saying that probably had their heads stuck a bit too far up their asses. Because having played Brewer, you know, a little bit before the full, like, meta sort of developed for Scoia'tael, you know, Brewer still sort of felt like he was, probably, like, it sort of felt like Scoia'tael was still on the bottom, but it didn't really feel like they were miles beyond the other factions. It felt like the new cards that were printed genuinely did help them. Poli and Yorvith Meditation were pretty obvious includes, and those are 2 new power swings. And I didn't really see a problem with that. Mahakam Volunteers were also extremely good. That's a new card for dwarves that I think is perfectly fine. I'm glad to see that one in the deck. It's more all of the other cards that they added that I hate for different reasons. A lot of people are complaining about Poly too. I think Poly's okay because it's a card that was clearly designed to, promote a certain deck instead of just being a blanket vanilla that you put in every single Scoia'tael deck and that every other deck fears and builds their deck around so that they don't get fucked by it. That's the part that feels miserable to me. And that's what it feels like the good Scoia'tael cards are right now. But I can live with cards that are tribal and clearly just designed to do something for one deck. I really wish that the other Scoia'tael decks got that, though. Like, hand buff right now is pretty miserable. Some people are playing it and it's getting carried a little bit by the golds, but it's still really bad. Spellatell got, Doppler. There are a couple little tricks you can do with it now, but the deck is pretty miserable because Spellatell didn't get Poly. Dwarves got Poly. So that feels kind of bad to me as well, but Poly is at least sort of a step in the right direction for what they should be doing, in my opinion. If they had printed cards that were interesting for the other tribal stuff, then there would be more to explore, and there would also be, in the final settling meta, there would be more diversity there. You wouldn't just see the same cards in every single Scoia'tael deck. But I got a little off topic. Where was I? I was talking about cards that didn't change wording. That changed wording very subtly. Because I read over Tremors, and I thought it was the exact same card. And in reality, Tremors is now 1 point stronger for every unit that you have on your side of the field. Because instead of damaging it, it no longer damages it. So that's only like a casual, maybe... How big of a buff is that? When you play Ithleen, that's a crazy buff. Ithleen into previous Tremors against a lot of decks would have actually been like a 0 point play with dwarves. That's just mind-boggling to think about. So they should really do a better job of making changes clear. Because I think that was easily the card. That was easily the discovery, having talked to a few people who worked on building the Brewer deck. Obviously, Dunkoro, who is my teammate, was the one who kind of got net decked the most for Brewer. But also people like Went to Town were working with Brewer a fair bit. So I got to talk to them, and that was the part that when I was trying dwarves, I completely missed. I just ran one Elzer's Thunder and called it that for Ithleen. And the card still felt pretty good, but that one discovery completely changed dwarves for me, and very quickly after that changed dwarves for the rest of the field, as it just quickly became easily the dominant deck. So cards like that, if you're going to change cards drastically, they should look like they changed at least a little bit. That's pretty much all I can say. To me that sounds like common sense, but to be fair, when you're actually trying to work on the cards, there are other factors to consider, such as, the length of the text. I personally do not care about the length of the text. I will read as much as I want. It's probably less fun for casuals, but there should at least be somewhere where I can read up on the cards. If not in the actual Gwent game, there should be some Gwentopedia, card encyclopedia or something where it just lists every single interaction that a card can possibly have or something like that. I mean, obviously I'm being a bit dramatic here, but not knowing when cards change and having to actually play them to see what the cards do is kind of frustrating. I think I'm finally nearing the end of this crap. I didn't really mean to drag this on as long as I did. But I was going to say one or two more things. How they handled this. Bugs that are in the game, and obviously the bugs are one of the top problems right now. The bugs in this game Some of them are completely game-breaking. You know, we're just waiting for someone to climb to rank 1 by abusing the bug with Dijkstra and Roach. You know, Emir can pick up enemy units. Crazy shit like that. I feel like I discover new bugs every single day in this game, by the way. You know, the fact that off of runestones you can just tell what ambush unit someone played by checking the history. I didn't even know that one until, like, a few days ago. Just all sorts of crazy shit. Like, what I hate about it is that it almost feels like, you know, the less game-breaking bugs are treated as features by the player base right now. And the best example of that is the fact that 25 card Nova decks are everywhere on Pro Ladder. Like, I think if you actually showed up on Pro Ladder and played a 26 card deck that ran Siri Nova, the average competitive player on Pro Ladder at least would actively make fun of you. And that to me is ridiculous. Like, I'm not going to deny that I abused the Siri Nova bug for a couple of games. I didn't play much Pro Ladder after the patch came out, so it was like small handful, like, you know, maybe 10 to 20 games. Mostly just to try the decks out, you know. I'm a deck builder at heart, and I like to see what I can do. And I felt like if everyone else is already playing this bug, and, you know, I'm just going to be handicapping myself against the entire rest of the field, then what do I really have to lose? And, you know, that's obviously going to be controversial. But the actual number of people that abuse bugs is pretty gross. And the fact that CDPR handled it by not only not giving repercussions for even the more serious bans, like, if someone played Dijkstra against me and waited for me to forfeit, I would want that motherfucker banned. I don't know about you, but I would. I'm pretty sure you would too. But, like, the fact that they have not only not done anything about any of the people that abuse bugs, but have made a statement saying that they are not going to do it, is pretty ridiculous in my eyes, because they could have easily just not done anything and stayed quiet, and that would be a strictly better decision than not doing anything and saying, hey, go abuse these bugs until we fix them. Like, obviously that's not what the statement said, but it's what players hear. I'm not going to do it. I've given up my days of 25 card Nova because I hate the card, hate the game, and don't want to play anything I don't find fun. Right now I find exactly 1, maybe 2, if you're really generous. Like, these 2 factions aren't the worst to play right now. I don't find many factions in this game fun, and I definitely don't find playing Nova decks fun, so I've given up the Nova bug, but, you know, I have to imagine that everyone else now is going to be playing 25 card Nova everywhere. And those types of bugs being abused is also really bad, because if someone new comes into the game and sees a card like Siri Nova, they're going to think, oh, cool, people with this card are going to have 26 card decks. And then they're going to burn Scorch. I heard stories of people, you know, in my Twitch chat telling that one over. And then Siri Nova just gets played after that, when it should theoretically either be impossible or the opponent should have cut a silver. And, you know, I have to imagine that's absolutely infuriating. So, that kind of stuff, you know, obviously it shouldn't be in the game, but at this point it is in the game, so not really much you can do there. But should, if not be enforced, should at least, you know, be a gray zone that should be discouraged. You know, it's really nice to think that everyone that plays Gwent is all part of one really big happy family. And for the most part, all the people that I actively sort of have gotten to know and have really talked to, and, you know, I consider them my friends, and I really like the game, and I like, you know, the higher end of the community. But you also have to acknowledge the fact that there is definitely sort of a thick muck at the bottom of the floor, where you have people that are perfectly willing to abuse these bugs, are perfectly willing to kind of just, go around willy-nilly and just, don't really care about anything except winning, and who even knows what else. So I would really prefer that get acknowledged and that there be a little more care taken to sort of safeguard the integrity of the game, instead of just using the sort of like grade school level honor code crap that it feels like is going on right now. That's obviously being a little harsh, but that's how I see it, so that's what I'm going to call it. And that's basically the summary of this video, as to this is just how I see stuff. I'm obviously being dramatic because I'm upset, but, good. I should be dramatic because I'm upset. I would like to get that across. I'm probably not going to look at any of the new cards. All I was going to point out here is that there are a whole bunch of dumb create mechanics, but as sort of an Easter egg, this is not really connected to the video, but something that I did just as my own project, kind of for fun. That's not going to work. Tab didn't pull up. I just went through all the new cards really quickly, see if I could find any interesting findings. My computer shut off on me while I was making this. I had some stats down below that didn't get saved, but basically I went through all the cards, did kind of my own sort of rudimentary scoring system where I was just like, does this card suck? Is it usable? Is it a card that you see in an acknowledged decent-ish deck? Or is it a card that is notably good? And I went through all the cards, did a little bit of looking, and, if you want to actually look through this, I went in order here, so if you would like to do this for yourself and criticize, oh, I called this card usable when it's actually unplayable, you can do that for yourself. But one thing that I did find was interesting about this, I was going to use this to sort of back up the fact that the patch is not that far off from being a whole lot better than it actually was, is the fact that a lot of the new cards, I do like the distribution that I got here. If I remember my numbers, this is exactly 50% of the cards that are, tiered. And I think that's really cool, because having played, card games like Hearthstone, not so much now, but especially for the earlier expansions, you got a whole lot of trash and then a few cards that broke the game. And so I think it's really exciting to see a whole lot of cards that are interesting, cards that can be built around, and cards that, lost my sentence there. That's the kind of crap that would get edited out, but I'm too lazy to do that. And if you're still here, you probably don't care that I'm too lazy to do that, so whoop-de-fucking-do. But, I do like the new cards. That is one thing that I want to stress, because I've been complaining about everything else that occurred in this, that came from this patch, except the UI. The UI is also good. So I guess since everyone else kind of felt like, talked about the good parts and then talked about the bad parts, I might as well talk a little bit about the good stuff here. Obviously, if you want to do your own analysis on this kind of stuff, go ahead. But I don't know. I thought this was interesting. Oh, I did forget one issue. Sorry, you thought this video was going to just suddenly turn into, like, some sort of, winter wonderland or something. But one other issue with the patch. Last time I checked, we got new leaders this patch. New leader. This is the old Unseen Elder, so ignore that. new leader, new leader, new leader, new leader. You might notice something about every single new leader's popularity. And that is that the first number is a fucking 0. Also Radovid. Radovid is just an unfortunate victim of the patch, though. But 0? 0? Like, what the actual fuck? I think probably the single most disappointing cards to see when the set was announced and not actually released, because by the time it was actually released, I was totally prepared for the fact that all the new leaders sucked. But seeing these cards, particularly Whispering Hill and because they were the first ones to come out, seeing those cards displayed, you know, on the card reveals here was absolutely soul-crushing to me, because I first read those cards as being gold cards, and I thought they were not necessarily good. I thought they were interesting. I thought they would make for decent-ish gold cards. I didn't really think they were interesting because they were spawn cards. I don't particularly love spawn cards, as I've made clear right now. One other thing I forgot to mention about spawn cards, you know, presuming that the new game mode that hasn't come out is an arena mode, I don't actually think that Create is a good mechanic for a healthy arena ecosystem. And I say this as someone who played Hearthstone Arena a lot. I had over a 7-win average back when I played more frequently. And some of the Discover cards are okay for that. It's not the worst mechanic ever to introduce in the game, but eventually they just went too overboard with it. And it felt like what was really precious about Arena early on in Hearthstone's development was that the game mode, instead of allowing you to build your deck around like whatever synergy crazy bullshit you wanted, you had to work with what you had, play off of smaller synergies and decent arena cards, build a balanced and healthy deck, you know, that can curve well, and, you know, had decent cards. Like, those are kind of the 4 goals for Arena. And I thought that that was kind of cool for a game mode. But what Spawn kind of does destroys quite a few of those, because with Spawn, who knows what sort of synergy you're getting? You're just hoping to get some good stuff. You don't need to worry as much about your curve, because the Spawn cards can fill your curve. As long as you have something to play early, you're pretty much good with Hearthstone. I already forgot the other stuff I laid out. This wasn't originally on my outline here. But you kind of get the idea. Like, for a mechanic that is going on 25% of the new cards, you can fact check me on that if you want. I did this a little while ago. It's possible not all 116 of them were out, but around 25% of the cards make use of Spawn. Or I guess it's called Create now, because that was surprisingly difficult to get. So even being generous, saying like 15 to 20% of the cards utilize Create, that's an awful lot of usage of Create for a mechanic that is terrible to have in a highly competitive game, and not even necessarily healthy for an arena mode. It's basically just a lazy way to balance factions by giving whichever faction would be the worst in arena a little bit of love by giving them just a card that, you know, pulls whatever crap that you want. So I am really not a fan of that decision. I think that Create could exist in the game and could be reasonable, but it should be on fewer cards. It shouldn't be able to spawn spies, stuff like that. Yeah. I was gonna say something positive about this. I was basically just gonna say that the new cards are cool. Ironically enough, the new cards are the smallest problem that this patch brought. There are a small handful of them that absolutely suck balls. and that I really wish I didn't have to play with. It's pretty unfortunate that a good amount of the threes fit in that list. I had a list of what the threes were, in case people were curious. I think some of them are off now. The meta has shifted, and you'll be like, why is that card a 3? It should only be a 2. This list is a little bit old, so I wish I had that. But, you know, cards like Siri Nova, Isengrim Outlaw, I obviously put as 3s. Trying to remember what else, but memory's failing me a bit. So, I'm probably going to wrap this up. I'm clearly tired of talking. My voice is hurting a little bit. I don't really do this kind of stuff often. And more so than that, you're probably tired of hearing me talk my ass off about a card game. You know, I'm just a guy. Well, hey, me being just a guy might be what's necessary for discussing these issues, because it feels like a lot of the people who have sort of had a little bit more of a reputation under their belt have gotten shit for it. And at the end of the day, if I get shit for this, I don't really care. I'm probably never even going to read whatever shit gets posted on Reddit. But for those of you who wanted to hear me ramble about this patch, now you can. So that's pretty hype, I guess. I have no clue how long this video is, and it's probably ridiculous. Oh yeah, it's a little over an hour. Have fun. Have fucking fun. I'll just leave this at that. Thanks for sticking with me. I might do more videos in the future. I was going to do some deck guides, obviously. That would be a little bit less, you know, heavy than what I'm doing right now. I was actually in the process of recording some deck guides, but then some IRL stuff got in the way. I had some problems recording. You know, I've definitely gained some appreciation for the people who put this kind of stuff out regularly and do a much cleaner, more polished job of this, because it is a lot of effort. So, I guess with that being said, thanks for watching, and I'll see you around.